Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we are joined by the lovely Adam Lance Garcia, who wrote the latest short story around Dexter Jettster. And from a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi. Adam, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Though I feel like it's weird that you lied that I'm lovely. I don't know why you would say that about anything. Like everything else was actually correct except for that one adjective. Adjective? I'm a writer. I'm a writer. I know what things are.
Grammar, words, sentences, speech,
punctuation,
paper.
We're trying our best.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why we host podcasts, because we're not writers, amateurs who like to hear our own voice when we edit things, but not really. But you write
Really?
things, Adam. You wrote The Veteran about Dexter Jettster.
I did.
So exciting, because I remember the day that all the FACPOV reveals were coming out. We were all anxiously waiting, which I'm so happy that they like make it an event now and waiting to see. Well, I guess I say now as if it's going to continue happening. Who knows? But
Tom,
when we got the Dexter Jettster reveal, I feel like that was the tweet that got the most engagement and people like screaming, crying, throwing up. GIF. So exciting. How does it feel to like know that you finally have written your own Star Wars story and it's about a character that's very close to your heart?
Oh my God, this whole thing has been, and I've said this in every interview I said it on at the panel, it's also a lifelong dream come true. Like I grew up reading the expanded universe, and I still collect the expanded universe. I'm trying to fill some holes, and I still collect all the canon books. So like Star Wars prose is literally the reason I started writing, full stop, because I wanted to do that. So the fact that I actually wrote a Star Wars period is insane. The fact that I did it with like Dexter Jettster, like if you had asked me like when Attack of the Clones came out, that would be my first Star Wars story, I would have not believed you. But it feels really right. The more the decision to write him, I couldn't see any other version of this story, any other character I would have chosen. It's just surreal. The whole thing is surreal. Like I did, like over and over again, it is surreal.
Yeah, and you got to be at the panel like for the first FACPOV, and then I got to watch you be on the panel for Return of the Jedi at New York Comic Con. Like I think that's the thing that a lot of people dream of doing, is like having that like pipeline from fan to creator and get to like add a little bit of your own flavor and your own passion into the galaxy. It's just a special thing.
I was not unsurprised, but pleasantly surprised that Tom brought that up. But because it is one of those, I realize how lucky I am that I got to do this, and but I also know how hard I worked to get to this point. But being the sort of like the fan who done good, who like actually made that transfer to like the other side of it, having seen it happen to others, and now being on the other side of it, it is like I pray to God that everyone has this kind of experience of like, I want to do this thing. You get to the other side of it, because in every point there is to this entire experience, it has exceeded my expectations, from just getting the email to getting the reaction on Twitter of like, wait, you wrote a Star Wars? And then it was like, wait, it's Dexter Jettster. And then it was like, wait, like the response to the story has been so positive, and just going through, and like the coolest thing happened not at the panel, it was after the panel, where I was like standing around in another room in New York Comic Con, and I saw like two fans being like, and they had the book in there, and I was like, yeah, you can come over here. Like, I'll sign. Like, it just felt so cool. It's the coolest. It's so cool.
And at the end of the day, it's just an awesome celebration. You know, those two fans that love Dexter Jettster and love that your story in it, you guys, everybody gets to celebrate in that together. And now we get to talk about it all having happened and all having read this story about how great it is, and how also it kind of made me a little bit sad, but also a little bit hopeful at the same time. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to jump back a little bit and just ask you about like what your first introductions were to Star Wars. You know, we've talked about making the transition from fan to somebody who's now created a story in the Star Wars universe, but where did you get your start as a Star Wars fan?
I don't remember. That's kind of the thing. It's like I'm 98% 98% certain it was Return of the Jedi on VHS, recorded like of HBO. And watching it, I think, on the floor of my parents' bedroom. That's, I think, what I remember. But from my point of view, from my very certain point of view, ha 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 ha. I don't remember being introduced to Star Wars. It was just sort of always there. I was more of I remember as a child, a Superman fan, but for some reason, like Star Wars just became sort of eclipsing like everything else. And I remember picking up the Glove of Darth Vader, which is the Jedi Prince series, because I was like age appropriate at the time. And because, I had the box sets, I had I still have all of VHS box sets. But there was this idea of like, oh, there's more story to Luke. There's more adventures with Luke. There's more adventures with Han. And that was really exciting. And I remember my cousin Glenn, I remember on this one family trip, and he turned out to be a big Star Wars fan. He's like, oh, you need to read the Heir of the Empire. And I was like, he's like, if you like this, you're going to love this. And from there, it was like, okay, well, now I have to read the Jedi Academy trilogy, and I have to read, oh God, what came after Jedi Academy? But basically, I just read everything as it came out, collected them as it came out. It's always been there. And then when the special editions were announced, I remember that was before the internet, so I just didn't know it was coming. I was in the theater, and all of a sudden there's this, like, you get to watch the movies in the theaters for the first time. And I fell to the floor screaming. I was so happy. And then my dad let me skip school with him, took me to go see the Phantom Menace. And then, I remember seeing it 10 times to my friends in theaters. And my buddy leaning over me like, that's R2-D2. It's a robot. It's just been such an ever-present part of my life. And then obviously The Force Awakens sort of like reinvigorated that, even though I was still like reading. It definitely reinvigorated because I went back to Legends and read the Legacy of the Force series leading up to. I'm like, I'm kind of curious if there's going to be any give and take. And there obviously wasn't intentionally, but there's a lot of weird integration. But so that's a long way of answering. I don't remember, and it's always been there, and it's just been the sort of keystone in my whole life.
I think it's awesome too how you were like reading the books at such a young age, and that kept sparking more curiosity and imagination about Star Wars. And I gotta say, like once you get your first Star Wars book, and it's like it just sinks its claws into you, and you can't escape. It's like the Sarlacc pit. You just can't get out. It's gonna digest you for 1,000 years. You're just gonna be reading and reading and reading, and maybe one day writing.
It was funny though. I will say, like it's curious to see, even you're right, because it does get its claws into you. But like from the outside, people don't seem to realize like what Star Wars prose kind of is. It's like even my girlfriend who read my story, helped me like edit my story before he sent it to Lucasfilm and to Del Rey, who is very aware of my fandom and my passions. We were out to dinner once with a few friends, and we were talking about the novelizations, and she's like, but why does it matter? You already saw the movie. And then there was like a record scratch, like, and everyone's like, no, you don't understand. It's a different experience reading the novelizations. Like things get explained, things are expanded upon. And she was like, okay, nerds, but cool. But yeah, it's like there's just, it's not unique because there are other franchises out there with other expanded universes, but there's something very special about the Star Wars canon novels and Legends novels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you haven't only written Star Wars, but you've had some other things that you've written, like your graphic novel, Sons of Fire, and you have the Green Llama legacy. And so I'd love to know, having that imagination as a kid and like getting into producing and getting into writing, like what kind of led you down that path? Was it because of some of those gateway things like Superman, like Star Wars, that really led you down that path forever to dominate your destiny? Or was, what kind of played into all that?
I asked my mom years and years ago, like what I kind of did as a kid, and she's like, "You were always writing." Like, I remember I was 8 or so when I first started the Land of Nowhere, which was a story about my friends going to a hotel and finding a portal to a different dimension, and writing that and always writing it. Like, I'm sure there's some that's are still floating around my parents' house, like just handwritten stories and marble notebooks. I loved cinema. I loved film. Obviously, that's partially because of Star Wars. Obviously, I'm a big reader. As my girlfriend says, I am a voracious reader. And I consume a lot of stories. I love storytelling. So, when I did some photography in high school, but I was always writing on the side. I was always doing something. I remember in junior high school, like I had this one English teacher who did not like me the first year, the first half of the first year, and then I wrote a short story about a leaf, about fall from the perspective of a leaf, and she's like, so went to my parents. She's like, I take back everything I said last semester. You wrote this story. This is something special. I'm moving into the advanced class. And I was a photographer in high school. And I'm an award-winning photographer. Though that's decades behind me now. And when it became time to go to college, I really wanted to do either writing or photography or film. And I loved watching like from Star Wars to Jedi, the making of Star Wars, all those like special edition VHSs that we'd get. I just loved learning about the creative process. Like the creative process is one of those things that enamors me more than anything else. I'm fascinated by it. It's one of the coolest things about my day job is I get to talk about the creative process. So I went into film school, and while I'm going to film school, and I remember taking a class with Terry Winter. He won an Emmy for The Sopranos while I'm in this class, and just like writing every day for a spec script, like every Sunday morning, just writing and writing and writing. Be like, this is the best thing I've ever done. But like, not really knowing exactly where the path would take me. So I sort of have had this sort of parallel career life where I've worked in production. My day job is I'm a video director at Condé Nast. I do a lot of the sort of Vanity Fair lie detector tests. I also have done, the career timelines, most recently with Robert Downey Jr. Name drop. And this, it's a very fun day job. But like I'm able to, like, having done worked at like places like MSNBC and Yahoo Entertainment and even the Martha Stewart Show, I was able to sort of craft and sort of grow a career in production, in entertainment journalism, essentially, while writing on the side, like writing constantly on the side, sometimes for a lot of pro bono work. A lot of the things I've done, sort of like the Green Llama, has been majority pro bono work. Even the audio drama that was sort of a self-published situation where I self-produced it and I self-financed it. But because I had this sort of parallel career going on where I was proving that I could sort of work with A-list talent and not be weird about it, which, trust me, is a thing because you'll see sure. It like. Yeah. But also that I was also producing my own stuff on the side and writing work of middling quality, at least, to get like but like doing the Green Llama in conjunction with working with a brand like Condé Nast, being public about my Star Wars fandom, but not being like that's my only thing I do. It got me seen. So like, that's a long way of answering your question. Like, it all kind of happened together. It's kind of hard to sort of separate the two because I was always writing while I was producing, like just in my 20s, staying up very, very late and just writing. And right now it's like where, I have a light day and I have to work on my current novel because, I need to get it done. Like I need to work on it. And I've heard of vacations. I don't take them even when I'm on vacation. I'm like, oh, this is more time to write, and then it's like, oh, it's like slow. Like it's, so yeah. That's
writing is like one of the most accessible hobbies, I think, because you can do it no matter what. You don't need equipment. You don't need, recording stuff. You just pen to paper, or if you have a laptop or a journal, you can do it wherever, whenever on your own terms. Yeah. So I get it.
The Lin-Manuel Miranda. I brought Ron Chernow's biography with me on this vacation, and I think it's a musical. Let me write this musical now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your vacation basically work.
Yes. Yeah. Every time. And yes, I am the next Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Let's speak it into existence. Get the coin,
Well, you're not just Adam Garcia. You're Adam Lance Garcia, like Lin-Manuel. It can't be just like Lin Miranda.
Two names.
So you already got the three names.
I got the three. Well, I have to have the three name because there's Adam Garcia, the Australian actor, best known for such films as Coyote Ugly and Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, and also most recently in Death of the Nile as the reporter outside the bar that Hercule Poirot goes to. Also an episode of Doctor Who.
Wow.
So he's trust me, I've stayed abreast of Adam Garcia's career. Adam Gabriel Garcia. But I have to use my full name because I'm generic white guy. And if you look at us, and trust me, this is true, I have a lot of fans around the world on my Facebook professional account because they don't look close enough at the face. And they're like, well, it is brown eyes, brown hair, generically white. Seems about and Adam Garcia, that has to be the same person, and so that is why I have to use the three names.
I love that. It's like free marketing.
Yes.
Adam Garcia, the Australian actor. Read his story from a certain point of view. The veteran. It's out there.
I got tagged in so many things. You got topless in Coyote Ugly, and there's once I got bombarded with tags of this photo of him dancing shirtless. And I was like, I wish I looked this good, but not me.
You're like, and we'll respectfully mute that notif because unfortunately. So I just kind of want to dive into this story and this experience. And we've talked a little bit about it. But what was it like to get the ask to join this project and also to be like, Dexter Jettster, mine?
Getting the ask, I kind of had inklings it was going to happen from a number of people, but the actual physical getting the email, I was kneeling down under cleaning out something, getting something from underneath my sink in my kitchen sink. It's a mess under there. I was getting something out, and then my Apple Watch buzzed. I look at it, and it's like, would you like to write a Star War? And I just kind of fell over a bit. Thankfully, again, I was already close to the ground. Took out my phone and was just like, I can't, it's this thing that I've been wanting and had been working towards forever. Just having that happen. It was from Elizabeth Schaefer, and who is a dear friend, but also just the coolest person I know. And having and then meeting with Sick Lane, even during that period of time, was just amazing. I'm sure everyone has talked about this, but Michael Siglane at Lucasfilm is the nicest guy. And it was really wonderful to find out that both Del Rey and Lucasfilm had just coincidentally wanted to work with me. And that to take this chance on this, I look at the other authors and from a certain point of view, and I'm just you guys have real careers, and you're you have you're Jason Fry and Mike Chen and Alyssa Wong, just to name a few, Olive Blake, and you're you have, and then there's me, and I'm this new kid on the town. I'm hi. It's very surreal. It's very it's so the fact that Siglane and Elizabeth took the chance on me felt is still amazing. And why Dexter Jettster? I knew that once I knew that even before I knew that this was coming in, I knew that I wanted to tell a Dexter Jettster story. And this is a story that I tell often, and he will not let me live this down. He makes fun of me, but my friend Patrick Willems wrote a tweet if you don't know who Patrick is, he is an excellent YouTuber. One of the top tier YouTubers, in that he is sort of the YouTuber. He does really intelligent film criticism, but also does it in such a way that you're like, wow, you actually put money and time and effort into this. It's not just a guy in his basement, like talking to the screen. It is an actual film production. It's really well thought. Like I call him a YouTuber's YouTuber because like the standard's so high.
Retweet.
Yeah, he posted something on Twitter, and it was Twitter at the time, and it was sort of like, Dexter Jettster, a Star Wars story when. And I can't. There's two tweets. I don't know which one it was, but I've pinned them so I can always. But like one of them, I was just like, I was going to make a joke, but like, but Patrick, you hate Star Wars. And then it was a sort of like cascade of like, well, what happened to Dexter after Order 66, after Attack of the Clones? And then it was this like, oh my God, like here's this story, here's this like idea. So when the ask came in, I knew that like Elizabeth said, like, you can pick a character, you don't need to pick a story necessarily. It all needs to get approved. I wrote back within under an hour. It was because it was like the first initial email, then me just freaking out about it, and then her writing back, and then me saying like, Dexter Jettster during the celebration of Coruscant, after the destruction of the second Death Star, and she was like, I love it, and they signed off on. She signed off on it. Lucasfilm signed off on it. They only had like one minor note, which was like, maybe like Dex can give hope to someone. And I'm like, actually, it's the other way around. They're like, ooh. Yeah, it's like, I knew the reasons why. There's a lot of reasons why. Jokingly, it's because I knew that no one else would pick him. But like, there's a lot of like I look at Claudia Gray. I mentioned before, like Claudia Gray's Master and Apprentice, what Chuck Wendig did with Jar Jar and Aftermath. I love the mixing and matching of the eras. I think that's the coolest thing about Star Wars, is that it is such a broad canvas that you can sort of like bring someone over from the prequels into the sequels and back and forth and go. Like, it's not just it's so deep that you can kind of mix and match these things. And then I just realized that like the more and more I sat with the character and the idea, I found that there was a really interesting narrative and a really interesting character arc for this character that I think everyone, when they saw it was posted, like, ooh, Dexter Jettster, this is going to be a fun, happy story because he's fun and happy. And I was like, it didn't become that. But that was because I spent so much time just figuring out like, well, what would he think and how would he think and why would he think that?
Yeah. And also he's seen so much over his very long life. And we've seen him pop up in other stories recently in other eras, the High Republic and between, which you mentioned, his introduction to Obi-Wan in Padawan. Mm-hmm. So we've seen a little bit more of him. But what are the consequences of all of these earlier stories that we've seen him at?
Yeah, it was. It's funny because I didn't know he was going to be in the High Republic when I pitched the story, because how could I have known? Like, I was still like on the outside, and I mentioned it to someone. They're like, "Hey, I'm doing a Dexter Jettster story." Like, it was a Circle of Trust, and they sent me like a very early like when they just got announced, and I'm like, that helped the story. It helped the story in a lot of ways. And then there was also like, I mentioned this a lot, like Kirsten White's Padawan like really helped me with that, my coming up with my story. It gave me the opening line, it gave me his arc. And I talk about this a lot, but like the more part of the reason why I chose Dex was I didn't have to sort of worry about like taking into account too much canon. Like, I would have loved to have told like my other option. I didn't pitch this, but like my other option in my brain was like, if they said no to Dexter Jettster, I would have like said like, what about like Palpatine after he's dead, or like an acolyte after he's dead, like, and his body comes in. because again, that sort of mixing and matching. But I was like, I didn't want to pitch that because I'm like, I'm going to butt up against like plans that I don't know about, storylines that they might want to keep open. And Dex felt like a very sort of safe, nothing's been defined in this period, like nothing at all. I could do whatever the hell I want with him right now because like the doors are open. But you start taking into account what happened in Aftermath. You start like, originally he was going to be in the diner, but you remember Aftermath, the diner's closed, or it's implied to be closed. And so you have to take that into account. You start bringing things in like the length of his life in the High Republic, because I didn't know what the story was when I wrote this, because I wrote this in October of last year. It's been literally a year since I've written it. So the stories that came out about him in phase 2 hadn't been published yet. But I knew that like just the length of time added weight to the things that he had seen and he had learned. So the more canon I took into account, the better the story became, because it wasn't like, I've said this other places where like you think like sometimes like if I can just do whatever story I want, like it's going to be a better version of that. Like I think they did that with Star Trek 09, which is a film that I really appreciate and really love. Like they said like, hey, we want to do a new Kirk and Spock storyline. Let's just put it over here in this other universe. And I think they like that's kind of like the best version of it. And sometimes you see like with Halloween or even The Exorcist, where like we're just going to ignore these things because we want to tell our own story that's a continuation of this first thing. I have found, at least in this circumstance, the more canon you took into account, you have to like sort of like, well, how does Dex react to this? How does that affect him? Why would it affect him that way? It just raised more questions that added more depth to his character and things that I wanted to explore.
You've talked quite a bit about like mixing and matching of like characters and eras. And like we've alluded to the fact again that he's in the High Republic, he's in Brotherhood, he's in Padawan, Attack of the Clones, so on and so forth. And I think the mixing and matching is intriguing to a lot of fans to see them in different settings and characters in different settings and different eras. And we see that both going forward and going backwards. So like for you writing Dex in this new time period, like as you were writing it and being conscious of that, like what was important for you to be like, there is purpose in the way I'm writing Dex and bringing him back into this era, as opposed to just bringing him in for the sake of bringing him in. Like what I want to make sure it has purpose and it has meaning, and it's more than just like, oh, look, cool character. Like what did that mean to you to be able to do that?
I mean, that's like the biggest challenge. Like you don't want to just do it to put him in there. And they're like a good example of sort of a microcosm of what you're talking about. And I feel like you and I talked about this like some separately, or I know I've said it before, but like I almost had Whaladons mentioned in my initial draft. And Whaladons are whales, space whales, which has never been seen again in Star Wars. They're space whales that were hunted in the glove of Darth Vader. And I wanted to have that reference in there because like, oh, this is my first Star Wars. I'm going to reference the first Star Wars that I had read. I wrote it down and then I went for a run and I came back and I deleted it because it felt like that said something to me that meant nothing. And it might say something to the audience, but it meant nothing to Dex. And so many points in the story, from all the things that I referenced to like the journey that he goes on, it had to you have to make sure that the story you're telling means something to the character you're telling it about. And the reason why I wanted to tell this story specifically at this point, because it's like, you remember what the last time we saw him in the films, and it's like the Kamino saberdart, and it's right before the war ends. So what is it right before the Clone Wars begins, which means the Empire is gonna rise, which means the Jedi are gonna fall. So what does it be like for him to be at the other end of it? So I think it's like one of those things where like the moment you put him in this point in this era, you realize there's a story for his character. So everything had to like sort of every reference, every thing he goes through had to make sure that it stayed true to him, his emotions, his arc, his internal life. You know, I don't want it. Like, I didn't just want. I knew I had to get him into that one shot of that was like the only thing I knew I needed to do was to have him sync up with that one shot in Return of the Jedi Special Edition outside in Coruscant. But like, if I'm going to get him there needs to be a reason for it that's true to him, not just me to be like, and now he's here because isn't that cool? That's cool. Like, yeah, it is cool. But if it doesn't mean anything to him, it won't mean anything to the audience. And I think that like there are so many times, like I really enjoy Spider-Man No Way Home. However, I hate every single time what's like portal opens, Andrew Garfield, pause for applause. I'm also Peter Parker, you know, it's like, I do appreciate those things, but it's like, the sort of flip side of it is, to use another Spider-Man reference, like all the things you see in the Spider-Verse films all extend and connect with Miles' story. Like, yeah, like it's really cool to see Spider-Man 2029. 2099. I can't believe I fucked that up.
There's a lot. There's probably a 2029 out there, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Probably.
Yeah.
But like seeing Spider-Man 2099 and like how his story connects with Miles' story is what makes that story matter, in the same way like having Spider-Gwen in that story. And it's so you can't just, for me at least, I didn't want to just have these things to have these things. I needed to make sure it both informed Dex's arc, Dex's life, his internal life, and because then it becomes something more than just like a dopamine rush of like, I remember this. Like the stories I think that like linger with you are the ones that challenge you, or like you know, I the reason why I think Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars is that it could have just been a retread of the things that we loved about the first movie. Instead, they're like, what is going to challenge these characters in the hardest way possible? Yeah, we got to finally see Luke and Darth Vader fight together. Like, that's the thing that we all wanted to see in the first movie. But now it means something. Now it means something real. And that is something that I really love.
I think also, you know, to give you a compliment here, I think it was really effective. And I immediately felt the weight of what was, you know, this moment for Dex, this moment in the galaxy. And I think if, you know, most of our listeners who love the books as much as we do, you know, who have also read the Aftermath series, who have also read Alphabet Squadron, know that it's not just the beautiful celebration at the end of Return of the Jedi, and you know, everybody's a happy family now, you know, Yub Nub and or victory celebration, whichever your heart desires.
Both.
You're right, and scene, but there's more happening there. And so I think to get it from Dex, who we know, as you know, like we've talked about, has lived a very long life, has met a lot of people, has seen a lot of stuff, has lived many lives in different roles. Kind of, for me, it clued me into thinking about all of these other stories that I love within the Star Wars franchise. People read the books is really kind of my thought. At the end of this.
Agree. You know, because I think that, but I think that's like the thing I love about Star Wars in general is that, you get the big old like end of the Empire storyline and the big Yub Nub victory celebration. But you know, from the beginning of like Tales of Jabba's Palace in Legends to what we did with the From a Certain Point of View series, you just get that sort of, there's more nuance to it. And I think that's the thing that I've always loved about Star Wars. Like, it's a much more nuanced universe than I think, you know, we want to give it credit for. Because it's like, oh yeah, like this came down, but like also, what does that mean? You know, I think one of my favorite aspects of the sequel trilogy is like this alt-right rise of this sort of like Empire fanboys. I think that's interesting, and I think it is a significantly. It shows that it's a much more nuanced universe than I think than we realize.
I think another interesting factor, of this story in this time in the real universe is the kind of surge and popularity of the prequels, and of, this cult following for Dex as a character. I love it. As a prequel kid, I'm just thrilled, like no complaints here. But what are your thoughts on the resurgence of the prequels, and what do you think it is about Dex as a character that allows fans who maybe have loved him this entire time, or fans who are just getting to know him and love him as a character, to kind of follow him and be interested in him as a character?
Well, the first part of that, like I'm not that surprised that the prequels have sort of had a resurgence because, as Lucas has said, like they're made for like children, like they are intended for young individuals. And I think with having been a prequel fan when I was in high school and just loving those movies, and seeing sort of the arc of them has been like, yeah, of course, like because we have the kids today, people in their 20s, get off my lawn. The kids, people who grew up with the prequels, like will have that nostalgia for the stories that were told then. So it doesn't surprise me. It's going to happen again with the sequels. Like for all the people who are like shaking their fists at the sky, at the old man kneels at cloud, that this ruined Star Wars. Like it's the same thing that they said, in 1999, it ruined Star Wars. It's just like either, you aged out or your taste in Star Wars is slightly different, which is fine. There's a lot of flavors in Star Wars. It is Baskin Robbins of franchises. But I think, yeah, it's going to happen. Like there's going to be a weird nostalgia, like for Andor. I mean, I already have a nostalgia for Andor. I miss that show so much. Exactly. Like, so, but like, in like 20 something years, there's going to be kids who probably grew up with Resistance, and they're like, I really want my where's Resistance? Like, and it's just a cycle of things, like in a real world sort of sense. Like, how many things besides Star Wars have we all been like, well, that was so cool, that thing that I grew up on? Like Stranger Things, that like this nostalgia for a thing that really didn't exist, but this idea of this thing, it's going to happen again. There's going to be like,
we'll talk about the High Republic the same way that people talk about Zahn's trilogy in the 80s after a set of movies ended, right? And we're in this time period where we're waiting, and it's like, we got books. Yeah, we got books. They're here.
Yeah. And then there's going to be kids who rightly will have grown up with the High Republic and be like, it never was as good as the High Republic. It's like, I mean, I won't disagree with that because the High Republic's amazing. Again, I keep on having to stop myself when talking about the High Republic, because like that's when like I go straight into fan mode and like
like right there with you.
It's so good. And it's like, I like, people ask me like, what's the thing that I really want to do? And I'm like, I want to work on the High Republic, or like, there are other eras, but like, I would love to write the High Republic because I just love that era so freaking much. And I am excited for every book. And like, now that like, I know people, like I get them early, and I'm like, I was going to buy this anyway. Haha, like
you're like, and I'm still gonna buy another copy anyway.
I'm gonna because I do. I do. Like
I own 4 copies of The Rising Storm, so I get it. I get it.
I do. I have like every single version of like every single book. I have to talk to Alex Damon because Alex has my copy of Rise of the Red Blade. I still collect these things, but like I'm waiting for the Eye of Darkness to ship in from like Goldsboro Books, like from England, because I'm like, well, I need that edition too. No, but like then on top of that, like the fact that like the High Republic is just an era is the perfect sort of distillation of what I love about Star Wars. It's like, it feels like Star Wars. It feels like the prequels. It's also, but like it's radically different than anything because like the Sith aren't there. Thank God. Like there's just, and it's so expansive. It's like, it shows why I love the expanded universe without like sort of the limitations of the expanded universe, which is, there was always the Sith, and Luke and Han and Leia couldn't die. I love that. Like I can read this. I'm like, I don't know if Elzar's going to make it through this. I just don't know. And you know what? I'd be sad if he dies, but also like, that's kind of why I'm excited about this. So yeah, I have to stop myself because I love the High Republic so much. What was the question? Oh, and why Dex? Yeah, I think Dex as a has gained this sort of fandom because he's, again, sort of like what makes Star Wars Star Wars. You have this Jedi walk into this bar, and then there's this weird, affable guy who has such history. Like, there's so much implied history in that one scene that is never explained, but gives you just enough context to understand who he is, why he's there, his relationship with Obi-Wan Kenobi. That, the moment you meet him, you're like, I want to learn more about this guy. He's the perfect club shitto. He's just like, I want to know more. I want to know why he's there. And again, he kind of has the perfect sort of length of, it's a 2-minute scene. Trust me. I know. It's I think it's just under or just over 2 minutes. It's not a long scene, but he comes in, he makes an impression, and he leaves before it gets boring. And he's just really enticing. And I think that's the best part about Star Wars. There's always something that you're just I want to learn more about this thing over there.
I think it's also pretty cool because it feels so out of place. We're going to walk into a diner here in the middle of our Star War. And it's
very American graffiti, this is George's vision here.
But it's 60s. Star Wars encompasses this too.
Yeah.
This is part of it. It is now, and I think that's kind of a fun element of it. But yeah, gotta love the Glepshido that you're there's something there. There's got to be something there. I won't get started on mine. We'll keep it in. But I could.
I think one of the most tragic things about the story too is just the fact that there is a question mark from Dex's point of view on Obi-Wan and what happens to Obi-Wan, because we know in Brotherhood, which takes place after the Clone Wars begins, we know there's that experience, but I think between then and Obi-Wan's death, we don't know what could have happened. We just know that Dex wonders whatever happened to that boy from Lenara. We don't know if, he had seen him after Order 66, or he doesn't know if he survived past Order 66. I get the impression from the story that he doesn't know. Yeah. What was it like to just write that sort of point of view for Dex of that unknown, and he doesn't know what happened, and maybe he feels some sort of responsibility for Obi-Wan's fate because of the information he gave him?
That's sort of again, I talk about Kirsten White's book, that's when I locked in that was his arc, that was the core of the story, that was the spine of it. But to why he doesn't know, it's well, why would he? How could he? The remit of this is to tell the story of Star Wars from a character's certain point of view. So, and I've said this elsewhere, but it does bear repeating. I think what I did was I learned as much about Return of the Jedi that specifically Coruscant during this period of time. I learned as much as I could about Dex, leading up to this story. I read Brotherhood. I read Padawan, as obviously. And I also read the Smuggler's Guide just to kind of get a sense of what is canonically true for Dexter. But then you start so you learn everything you can. You learn all the things that are true at this period of time. And then you start asking yourself, well, would he know Obi-Wan survived? Well, the audience obviously knows, but why would he know? How could he know? And then you're well, how does that affect him? How does that lack of knowing make it worse? I mean, I know people who have lost loved ones, who have lost friends and family who, but they don't know what happened. And that sort of lingering ellipses of a question it haunts them, and it haunts them to this day. And I think, again, it's going back to what I said earlier, the more canon you kind of hit up against with him, it's you're well, how does he feel about this? How does he react to that? What is that weight? How would someone, how would you feel? And this is kind of the question I was asking, how would you feel if you said your friend came to you and said hey, I need some advice. What do I do about this? And you're well, this is what you got to do. And then cut to 10 years later, and you can draw that direct line of they got in the car and they never made it to the other side, and no one knows what happens to the car. Did they die? Probably at this point, no one's heard of them. Like, it's like, again, like you could say to them, like, yeah, like I need to go to the store. How do I get to the store? Oh, you this. And then they never show up. Like that feeling is a real feeling that people have every single day. So it just like, again, like you have to start thinking about like, what does he know? What would he know? How would it affect him? And how does it inform his arc? Like I have there's one thing I got to towards the end of the story where I obliquely mentioned Luke. Like I sort of I had a remit to myself, like, don't mention Luke, like don't mention Luke, don't mention light. Like, why would he know? Like, how would he know who this guy is? Especially because you start thinking like, well, he knows first Death Star was destroyed. Of course he does. Why wouldn't he? But then you're like, why would he know, living in the Imperial Center where information is clearly going to be like modified? Like, why would he know who Luke Skywalker was? And also the other question of like, well, why would he think that's like Anakin Skywalker's kid? Like that, like there's so many like things that you have to start thinking like, the moment you have to like, the audience knows, and let the audience sort of bridge that gap. But like having him not know, it made for a more honest story. That's kind of what it goes to. It's like, if he knew exactly what happened definitively, that's just like me pandering to the audience. It's like, so he knows. And it's sometimes there's like, you want to have that sort of, I forget the exact term, but like where the audience knows more than the characters. That creates a much more interesting sort of relationship between you and the characters.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think characters in Star Wars, when they are at their lowest point, are when they're the most interesting. And I think of Dex the same way now. I think of Obi-Wan or Luke, which is funny because they are all connected. You can draw very short lines between each of them, and they all let somebody down, and they feel guilt over that forever because there are the unknowns of like, what could I have done? What happened to Ben when he left the temple? Like, what happened to Anakin when I left him on the sands? And what happened to Obi-Wan when I lost contact with him after Order 66? Like, it's just horrible. It's a horrible feeling.
Yeah, true story. I told Rian Johnson that. Like, I told him that, like, I don't think I could have written my story without The Last Jedi. Like, because I think, I feel like it's becoming less controversial to say, like, The Last Jedi is my favorite of the sequel trilogy, like, by far. And it's easily, like, one of my favorite Star Wars movies ever. And I think it's because of, again, the fact that it challenges the audience, it challenges the characters, and allows actual, like, again, I loved the EU and I still love the EU. But there's the thing that I always struggled with the EU was that Luke, he'd be sad. Like, yes, Mara Jade died. Yes, Ben Skywalker is kind of a wet blanket. Like, like Chewie dies. But like, there's never this sense of like, he never really grew in as a character beyond getting more powerful. And I think I remember saying to Ryan, I'm just like, because I was directing him in a video, humble brag. And I was like, I don't think I could have done this if you hadn't done what you did with Luke, because I think it showed me what you could do with characters in this universe.
I mean, as a fan, just somebody who also loves The Last Jedi, I feel the same way about, the way that Ryan like challenged every single character and the ways that each of those characters got through that. It made me think about Star Wars in ways that I had never considered.
Yeah.
I would say that The Last Jedi not only like made me a lot of friends that have in Star Wars and now in other fandoms too. I've connected with people because of it, but it's also the reason why I'm here on this podcast today, very literally. Like, so I understand the value of that film in terms of kind of challenging and making you think about Star Wars in a different way. We talked a lot about the sad feelings, the heavy feelings, the bit of the despair and the guilt. But there's also, I mentioned it up top, once you get to the end of this story, you feel a bit of hope for our young person. I did not catch the audiobook on this one. So Vekin,
it's Vekin. It's Vekin. The audio, I no, if Mark did Vekin, I prefer Vekin. I'm going to say that like author preferred text, Vekin. If you want to pronounce it Vekin, go right ahead. Like I'm, like
Han.
Exactly.
Borrow Daniel Jose Older's gavel and just be like Vekin canon.
Yeah,
Bang.
no, I do that sometimes, mostly the most ridiculous things with Dexter. But no, I prefer Vekin because she is named after my friend Kevin and his wife Emily Menez. So there's that's kind of like the E sound is the same. So Vekin.
Canon to me. So we get kind of Dexter kind of talking to two young people kind of in this story. So, and I'm gonna ask you about the pronunciation of the other name because we're here. Is it Camos?
I always pronounce it Camos, but apparently
Camos.
I've heard that it's Camose because he is named after a friend of mine and Twitter follower and social media follower. This really nice kid. It's Camos Mills or Camose Mills, and I just know him by a text, and he's always been like, he's the perfect kind of fan who is like, I don't love the sequels, but also I just like Star Wars and I'm not going to be a jerk about it. And he's always been really lovely. And when I was coming up with a character, I was like, I wanted to be Camos. He has a good Star Wars name. It's a good Star Wars name. And I DM'd him out of the blue and I was like, what's your favorite Star Wars alien? He's like, I really like Yuuzhan Vong. And I'm like, okay, so other than that, he's like the Chiss. I'm like, okay, other than that, he's like, well, a human. I'm like, okay, alien. And then like, he's like, I like the Natalians because that way I could like keep my dreads. And I'm like, great, we're doing that. But I was like, there's no version of the story where I'm gonna do a bong. Like they're gonna let me do a Yuuzhan Vong. But yeah. So he's based after him. And I still love that he had no idea. He just never put one and one together until he read the story.
I love that. I feel like that's a great surprise. There's been a couple of like people that I know who have gotten like characters named after them because they're friends or whatever, and I've recognized it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look, it's exciting for a reader.
Adam, you had a Jedi as well at one point. I think
was it
Mike
Lanella
or no, was it Charles or?
No, it was Justina Ireland wrote her into one of the High Republic Adventures annual. There is
that's right.
She's like on a couple of panels, but she's at a Jedi at one of the Jedi temples. Her name is Lanella Bayou, and it's because Heather Antos. She texted me and she's like, "What's the name of your RPG character?" Because like they couldn't come up with the Jedi name. I'm like, oh, it's Alon Bayou. And KABE -OYU. That is the name Bayou has been a name that I've had since I was a kid, and it's been my role playing character's last name since forever. It's also like getting into the weeds. It's also my original character died, but now I'm playing the ancestor of that. Doesn't matter. Point is, it's pronounced Bayou, and I will stand by that. Because if it ever gets like I know, but like that was the one of the weird moments in my life where like I was going on a flight to LA for work, and I was like, oh, I'll just catch up with all the Star Wars comics, and I'm looking on my phone because I'm reading them on Comixology, and then it's like, I'm Lanella Bayou. I'm like, dude, what's going on? And I was freaking out. And I'm like, what? And like we're about to take off, and I can't like call anyone. I also can't shout because I'm like in an airplane. So I got I got a Wi-Fi so I could order like this just giant box of cookies to show up at Heather's house, because I was like, that's the coolest thing anyone's ever done for me. So yeah, it's weird. It's fucking surreal. I had no idea. And like I was freaking out, and it was all of me to not like have any of my role-playing characters and my friends show up in my Star Wars. And that's like a thing. Like I'm just going into the weeds again. Like I said at the beginning, like try to stop me talking about writing a Star Wars. So I gave myself mandates, which was like I did not want to do just fan service for the sake of fan service. Like I've already mentioned, like I said to myself, like everything needs to extend out from Dexter's story, and his arc and what is true for this point in the timeline. If I'm gonna reference it, it needs to kind of like inform where he is, where he's going, et cetera, et cetera. Also, I can't just put characters in there and name drop. Like I really wanted to like name. I can't, because like my friend Chris, his character's Eddie Konopsky. I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna get that in. There's Alon, and I was like, I'm gonna have a character named Alon. But I felt like it was all stuff that meant for me. Like this is all stuff that's true for me. Whereas like Beckon and Kamos, like they felt like, well, these feel like good Star Wars names and they do mean something to me, but also like they work. Like if you had asked me right before I started writing this, like who would I name a character after, I would have named him one of the characters after my friend Jeff, who is like has been my Star Wars friend since I was a kid. Like he's my best friend my whole life. I was going to name a character named Jessic after his first, like his name is Jeffrey Isaac. So I was like Jessic, but that didn't happen because I'm like, that felt too close to me. That felt too much like I might put him in another story or her in another story. But I didn't want to just put in like all of my role-playing game characters, because it's like, that means a lot to me, but like what's going to mean more to me is that this people actually like the stories works, and so I forgot what the question was. I'm just going off on a rant.
You know what? There was no question. I was just excited about name pronunciations. But the question that I was thinking about, which we'll get there, it's great. It's all good. Yeah. You're not going to see me complaining about the weeds. That's like, I really love that. Is we get him kind of talking to two young people. And I think everybody in his life, is a young person compared to Dexter Jettster, right? And I thought it was great to see kind of the different, approaches he took. Obviously, he's telling Kamos, don't do anything. Like I've seen this before. Take care of yourself, in this moment. Don't go one way or the other. Take care of yourself. Stay safe. And in the same vein, he also is talking to Beckon and he's saying, there's more out here. You did the right thing in this moment, or you did something that was honorable. And I see myself in you, or I see a potential in you. Let's, make sure that you're safe and continue to do good things. And I thought that was really compelling and interesting. And I just wanted to know kind of what your thought process is of bringing in more young people characters.
I mean, the thing about Star Wars is a generational story. Like that is something that one thing that I've never understood about some of the pushback people have given about the sequel trilogy is like, well, I want to just have more adventures with, and I had a fight with a friend of mine like years ago, where he's just like, I just want to like Luke to show up and like save the day. And I slammed my fist on the table, like that's not Star Wars. Because to me, like you look at A New Hope, it is like the hero of the very first story of the first trilogy, Obi-Wan Kenobi, is literally passing the torch to Luke, like a 20-year-old kid, a 19-year-old kid. And that's like what appeals to me in the sequel trilogy. It's like, it's Rey's stories now. And I really wanted it to sort of mirror, again, this sort of, it's like this microcosm of Star Wars to be this like this generational thing, that it is this like Luke in Last Jedi, like Obi-Wan in A New Hope, this idea of rediscovering hope after everything in the next generation, because especially as I've grown older, and there's so many experiences that I've had where it's just like everything's just going to shit. Like every time, like I think this big thing is going to fix things, and then like it gets even worse somehow. I mean, look at the news. I was young enough to remember when there was like peace in the Middle East, and here we are now. And you see those things, and then you get really like drawn into darkness. But then you see a kid do the right thing for the right reason at the right time. And yeah, you sort of have that hope. You have that sort of rebirth, because again, I think that's what makes Star Wars is that it is a generational story. And I really wanted to show sort of like even through them, like what the experience is. Like there are times when you're with Kamino, you're just like, I'm just gonna go like have a lot of fun, and like that we won, and not necessarily like do this thing for the right reason. And then you have Vekken, who is inspired by the things that have been lost, that is always going to be like fighting for the right reason. And you kind of get to see that dichotomy, and because again, it's something that we see every single day, like literally every single day. So yeah, I think those are all the reasons and more as to why I wanted to make sure there was like a younger voice. Because again, like I think even when it comes to Star Wars, to your point, like the prequels are really popular right now because the youth of that time grew up with it, and now they're adults, and now they have this thing that they love. Just like the sequel trilogy is beloved by younger audiences, and it's gonna be their Star Wars. You always have to remember, like, it is a passing the torch. That's real, like that's life, man. That's life. And that's I wanted to sort of hammer that home.
I also felt like, okay, so I bought a copy of Revenge of the Sith novelization today that I found at the library book sale. I already have it, but this one was $1 and it was signed. So I had a moment. I was like, holy cow. But in reading this story, it reminded me, point being, and I was like, okay, I've got this book in my hands, and I've got this book in my hands today. And I'm like, oh, that last page of the Rot's novelization, I got a same feeling of like, oh, something more.
That's really kind of you.
100% serious.
It's very, very kind of you.
Yeah. So I think that kind of lasting hope, or that lingering, feeling of something better, potentially, Hera's, we have hope that things will get better, and they will.
Yeah.
Is so important. And I thought it was wonderful in this story.
Thank you. And also just comparing me to Matthew Stover's adaptation is very, very, I'm gonna thank you.
Star Wars being a generational story, in some ways, each generation represents a second chance for some people.
Yeah.
Like Luke is a second chance, and Rey is a second chance. And, but also like those younger generations can teach the old generation. And it's not just, hey, I'm the older generation, I'm going to mold you into the image that I could never be. It's no, I'm going to pass on what I learned, and you can form that image on your own, but we can kind of work off of each other and make this work. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about Dex and Vekken, is it's like Dex is now, I think in some ways, like seeing Vekken as a new protege, like an Obi-Wan second chance of like, I failed Obi-Wan, but I won't fail Vekken. I'm going to pass on what I learned from that experience, and Vekken in turn is going to teach me and help me find my hope. And I think that's like the beautiful thing about what seems to be a blossoming relationship between these two, is like they're going to keep fighting the good fight, because again, things weren't just sunshine and daisies after the Death Star blew up. It's going to be an uphill battle, especially in like the Imperial homeland, but they have each other to get through it. And I think that's why like this story ended on such a hopeful note for me, and probably for Sarah as well.
And to that point, I think it's and it's weird. Like, I don't think I really realized this until this conversation, which shows you like how writing and storytelling is such a weird, like, living experience. Like, I don't think I realized that what Vekken also represents is that his failure wasn't complete. It wasn't a complete failure. Like, he blamed himself for destroying the Jedi. He blamed himself for like extinguishing the light of the Jedi, that like because of him everything fell. But he realizes through her that like, no, that light still lingers. I didn't necessarily completely fail. There is still hope. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's like you realize that like there's this kernel of something that like you think is lost in the next generation. With Obi-Wan and Luke, with and Leia, and with Rey, that's Star Wars.
makes you think of Samwise. He's like, there's so much bad that's happened in this world, but there's some good still left and it's worth fighting for. Like that's the moment for Dex in the story.
Yes.
And I think it was so beautiful too how you described it as like a star in the darkness and immediately like evoked that starlight beacon imagery for me, which like obviously Dex was there and saw it fall, right? And so like he has seen the fall, the rise, the fall, the rise, the fall of the Jedi over and over and over. And for him to think about like maybe that star is still in the sky, maybe that starlight beacon is still there for me personally within myself and I can find it again. That was so cool as a High Republic fan to see that and be like, he was there and he's finding it again, you know, the hope.
The starlight beacon thing was interesting too, because it's like once I knew he was in it, like I'm like, oh well, obviously he was alive to see the fall, but like again, that's sort of like the longer he lived, the more stuff he sort of like rise and fall, the rise and fall, the rise and fall, to your point. The star thing, my God, the amount of times my girlfriend and I like revised those lines so I got to like say what I was trying to say. And I think that's something that like people kind of forget. Like a lot of times, like it's not, I mean, obviously there's editing and there's it's always going to happen with anything you work on. But with this story, with any story, like sometimes like you write something and it doesn't say what you think it's saying. And we like it was one of the few, like my girlfriend is a very harsh editor, but it was we only had like a few points that we were like, we really need to like work on this before we send it. And it was like, the imagery of starlight and like all the light we cannot see sort of thing, that we worked on for a very long time. That was a contentious afternoon.
It was worth it. You know,
Thank you.
what got on the page was really effective. So
thank you.
When maybe we've answered this question, maybe we have, but you know, this is the kind of question that we ask. So we're going to do it anyway. And if your answer is like, I've already answered it, then that's cool. But to kind of wrap up, we open with, you know, where did you get your start in Star Wars? And we love to close with, you know, what does Star Wars and in particular this experience mean to you?
Oh my God. I mean, this is just a dream come true. I mean, I think it's been kind of obvious, like how effusive I am. This has just been literally a dream come true since I was 12. I think that's the earliest I can remember. But like this whole experience has been just everything I wanted. That Lucasfilm was happy with it is even better. The fact that the fans seem to really respond to it has been surreal and wonderful. If there was a perfect version of this in my brain, this is sort of kind of exceeded it. It's just because it's like at every turn, it's just like, this is exactly how I would have wanted it to happen. And I don't try not to get emotional about it, but it is very much like, it is just like, this is everything I've ever wanted. And like, as someone who, the reason they write, the reason they went to film school, the reason I have this career, is because of this galaxy far, far away. It's kind of hard to describe how important it is to me. Like I mentioned at the top of this, it's kind of my keystone. And you know, it still is. Not every story will ring true with me. Not everything will be my Star Wars. But Star Wars, this galaxy, this playground that the sandbox that I got to play in when I was a kid, with action figures and stuff and reading these books. And then now here on the other end with actually playing with the action figures. It's everything to me. I don't know how to accurately describe how much this thing means to me.
I think that's a feeling a lot of people share when the ask this question. You know, it's like you can come up with an answer, but it's like no matter what answer you have, like words still just can't do how you feel justice, because it's like I don't know, kind of what binds us all together, and it's just there. It's omnipresent in our life. But thank you for like contributing your voice to Star Wars and to such an awesome, important character, especially as us who grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, means a lot to us as well. So thank you so much. For our folks who are listening, where can they find you? online, and what do you have coming up that you want to give a shout out to?
You can find me on every social media that currently exists or will exist at Adam Lance Garcia, just my full name, all one word. What is coming up next? Some things I cannot talk about that are not Star Wars related. I need to clarify that. That is, God, I really want to tell you what's coming. I can't. It's very exciting. I'm also working on a novel, and there's Sense of Fire Volume 3. There's a lot of things in the works I really can't tell you about.
Well, that's more reason to follow you on all your socials.
Oh, so but I can actually, I can say that the third Green Llama novel is finally finished. If you want to check those out, just go to Amazon, type in the Green Llama. I would say start with either Horror and Clay, Unbound, or the Sherlock Holmes crossover. Those are sort of written. Oh, in Science. Actually, Green Llama Science. Those are all written to be like intros to the era. And I just finished the third full-length novel earlier this year, and we're hopefully getting it out sometime next year. That is something I can't talk about. Everything else, NDA, and it's That's such a weird way to end it.
No, that's like so you're gonna have to follow me on all of my social media,
all the socials,
so you'll know immediately when those things are announced.
It's gonna be very exciting.
Let me guess. It's a High Republic surprise Phase 4, and it's only Dexter Jettster books, and you're writing all of them.
It's Lanella K. and Dexter Jettster running around having adventures with Eddie Konopsky and oh god, yeah, that's exactly what's gonna be.
And the whales and the Bong, and they're all back.
All back, all the Bong.
In the time it took you to say that, I've pre-ordered 6 copies.
6 copies, yeah. And the thing is, like, spoilers, but they're trying to get revenge on the moon that killed Chewie.
Oh, I knew it. And it's about time. We've been waiting.
No notes, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. We appreciate your time, and until then, may the Force be with you.
Bye.